Welcome to the Daily History Chronicle. Each day, we travel back to discover a pivotal moment that changed the world. These aren't just dates and facts. They're stories of courage, conflict, innovation, and consequence that still echo through our lives today. Are you ready to explore? Let's see what happened on this day in history.
Good morning and welcome to today's episode. I'm Richard Backus, publisher of University Teaching Edition. And every day I get to share a piece of history that I think you'll find as fascinating as I do. On January 8, 1918, President Woodrow Wilson stood before Congress and delivered one of the most consequential and contradictory speeches in American history. Europe was drowning in blood. The Great War, in its fourth year, had become a meat grinder. Verdun killed 300,000. The Somme, 400,000. Entire villages in France and Britain had lost every man of military age. Trenches stretched from the English Channel to Switzerland, a scar across the continent where millions died for nothing. Russia had collapsed into revolution. The Bolsheviks were negotiating a separate peace with Germany, which would free 1 million German troops to move west. If that happened, Germany might win. America had been in the war for only 9 months, troops arriving by the hundreds of thousands, but not yet fighting major battles. Wilson spoke for 30 minutes, 14 points for ending the war and building lasting peace. Open diplomacy, no more secret treaties, freedom of the seas, free trade, reduction of armaments, adjustment of colonial claims with colonized people's interests given equal weight. Self-determination for people trapped inside dying empires, Poles, Czechs, Serbs, all of them. And point 14, a League of Nations to make another world war impossible. The speech was translated into dozens of languages and dropped over German trenches. In Petrograd, 300,000 copies circulated within days. Exhausted soldiers and civilians embraced it as a sign of hope. French Premier Clemenceau remarked sarcastically, "The good Lord had only 10." Here's what makes this fascinating. Wilson was simultaneously a visionary and a hypocrite. His principles would reshape the 20th century, while he had no intention of applying them equally. Wilson's vision was revolutionary. His racism was genuine. The 14 points helped end World War I, but couldn't prevent World War II. Wilson's stubbornness destroyed his own dream, yet his principles became the foundation of the post-1945 world order. Wilson at 61, second term, 9 months into a war he'd tried to avoid. He'd won re-election on, "He kept us out of war." But German submarine warfare and the Zimmermann telegram made neutrality impossible. Now America was fighting, and Wilson needed to explain why. Not conquest, not empire, the old reasons didn't work. Traditional diplomacy had produced this catastrophe. He needed something different. But he also had tactical concerns. Lenin had seized power in Russia and published the Allies' secret treaties, agreements to divide colonies after victory. The revelation made Allied talk of civilization ring hollow. Lenin was offering immediate peace, appealing to war-weary populations. Wilson needed to respond with his own vision, one that would keep Russia fighting, boost Allied morale, and position America as a moral leader. He assembled the inquiry, experts to study, issues related to the peace conference. They worked for months. On January 8th, Wilson distilled their work into 14 points. The first 5 were principles. Open covenants openly arrived at, freedom of navigation, free trade, reduction of armaments, and crucially, a free, open-minded, and absolutely impartial adjustment of all colonial claims based upon the principle that the interests of the populations concerned must have equal weight with the equitable claims of the government. Read that carefully. Colonized peoples should have a say. In 1918, this was revolutionary. Points 6 through 13 address territories: Russian evacuation, Belgian restoration, Alsace-Lorraine to France, Italian borders, autonomy for Austria-Hungary's peoples, Balkan independence, Ottoman dismantling, Polish independence. Point 14, the League of Nations. The speech was a sensation. Even Theodore Roosevelt grudgingly praised it. Exhausted Europeans embraced it as hope. And in the colonized world, India, Egypt, Korea, Vietnam, nationalist leaders seized on self-determination. If Poles deserved independence, why not Indians? Here's where the contradictions begin. Woodrow Wilson was born in Virginia in 1856, the son of a minister who enslaved people and supported the Confederacy. He absorbed not just the racial views of his time, but also embraced them as scientific truth. As a scholar, he wrote admiringly about the Klan's role in redeeming the South. As Princeton president, he refused to admit black students. As president, he resegregated federal offices that had been integrated since Reconstruction. Black and white federal employees who had worked side by side for decades were suddenly separated. When a black delegation protested in 1914, Wilson was hostile, lecturing them that segregation was for their own good. He screened The Birth of a Nation, a film portraying the Klan as heroes, in the White House and praised it. The film used quotes from Wilson's own writings. His endorsement helped it succeed despite NAACP protests, sparking a Klan revival. When Wilson spoke of self-determination, he meant white Europeans. His aide, Colonel House, called Africa and Asia backward countries. This wasn't hypocrisy. Wilson genuinely believed in racial hierarchy. Self-determination was for civilized peoples. The colonized world needed guidance. So when Ho Chi Minh tried to present a petition to the Paris Conference seeking self-determination for Vietnam, he was ignored. When Japan proposed a racial equality clause for the League, Wilson helped kill it. Australia objected because of their White Australia policy, the American South because it would undermine Jim Crow. When William Monroe Trotter tried to attend the peace conference to advocate for Black Americans, he was denied a visa. India, Egypt, and Korea all cited Wilson's words, only to be told no. Not ready, not civilized enough. The 14 points applied to white Europeans. Full stop. When the war ended in November 1918, Wilson sailed to Europe, the first sitting president to travel overseas. Millions lined the streets in Paris, Rome, and London. He was the man who would build a just peace. But at Versailles, Wilson faced three men with different priorities. Georges Clemenceau of France had lived through 2 German invasions. He wanted Germany crushed, permanently crippled. David Lloyd George of Britain had won re-election on Make Germany Pay. Britain wanted punishment, colonies, and the elimination of German economic competition. Vittorio Orlando of Italy sought territory that had been secretly promised in wartime treaties. None cared about Wilson's idealism. They'd lost millions of men. Their countries were devastated. They wanted compensation and security, not moral philosophy. Wilson fought for the League of Nations. He believed that if he could just establish the League, it could fix whatever problems existed in the treaties. So he compromised on everything else. The Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, violated most of the 14 points. Germany was stripped of 13% of its territory and all colonies. Its military was limited to 100,000 men. Germany was forced to accept sole responsibility for the war guilt clause, and saddled with reparations so massive, 132 billion gold marks, it couldn't possibly pay them. Secret treaties weren't repudiated, they were honored. Japan got German concessions in China. The colonial world remained under colonial rule, with German colonies transferred to Britain and France as mandates. Wilson got his league written into the treaty, but at a terrible price. The treaty was so punitive, so at odds with the 14 points, that it discredited the peace process. Germans felt betrayed and humiliated. They'd agreed to an armistice on the basis of Wilson's promises. Instead, they received a treaty that treated them as criminals. Many historians argue that Versailles created the conditions that made Hitler possible: the economic chaos, resentment, and national humiliation. Hitler would call the treaty a disgrace and promised to overturn it. Wilson wanted to prevent future wars. The treaty he brought home helped cause the next one, and then Wilson refused to compromise at home. Wilson returned to a Republican-controlled Senate in July 1919. Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, chairman of Foreign Relations, had legitimate concerns about Article 10, the obligation to defend all member nations against aggression. Lodge feared this would bypass Congress's constitutional power to declare war. Lodge proposed 14 reservations preserving American sovereignty. Many were reasonable. Compromise was possible. But Wilson refused. He'd compromised in Paris. He wouldn't compromise at home. In September 1919, he embarked on a grueling speaking tour, 8,000 miles, 38 speeches in 3 weeks. He was already sick. In Pueblo, Colorado, he collapsed. On October 2nd, he suffered a massive stroke that paralyzed his left side. Wilson's doctor admitted he was permanently ill physically and weakening mentally. But from his sickbed, Wilson refused Lodge's reservations. On November 19, 1919, he instructed Senate Democrats to vote against the treaty. They did. It failed. It failed again in March 1920. America never joined the League of Nations. Without American participation, the League was crippled. When Japan invaded Manchuria, when Italy invaded Ethiopia, and when Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland, the League was helpless. Wilson died in 1924, broken and bitter. The League failed to prevent World War II. So what happened on January 8, 1918? Wilson articulated principles that reshaped the 20th century: self-determination, open diplomacy, collective security. But his racism limited who deserved these rights to white Europeans. His compromises at Versailles undermined his ideals, producing a punitive treaty that helped cause the next war. His stubbornness at home destroyed his own creation. Yet his ideas eventually won. The UN was built on Wilsonian principles. Decolonization used his language. International cooperation became the norm. Why does this matter today? Because we're still debating Wilson's questions. When we argue about intervening in Ukraine or Syria, we're continuing the Lodge-Wilson debate. Should America defend democracy and deter aggression worldwide, or focus on problems at home? Avoid foreign entanglements. That's the debate that killed the League. When we discuss NATO expansion or UN authority, we're arguing Lodge's points from 1919. Does collective security enhance our safety by preventing wars, or trap us into defending countries we don't care about? When we see nationalist movements, Scotland, Catalonia, Kurdistan, demanding independence, we're watching Wilson's self-determination in action. The principle sounds simple. People should govern themselves. But who counts as a people? What boundaries? Wilson articulated the principle, but couldn't answer these questions. We still can't. When we debate humanitarian intervention, Should we stop genocides in Rwanda or Darfur, even if they don't threaten us? We're wrestling with Wilson's idealism versus Lodge's realism. Wilson also teaches uncomfortable lessons about rhetoric versus reality. We champion democracy while maintaining close relationships with Saudi Arabia and Egypt because they serve our interests. We speak of human rights while selling weapons to regimes that violate them. The 14 points sounded noble. Versailles was brutal, and Wilson's rigidity remains a cautionary tale. Compromise isn't betrayal. Wilson could have gotten most of what he wanted if he'd accepted Lodge's reservations. Instead, he got nothing. But his ideas outlasted him. The League failed, but the vision survived. When Wilson stood before Congress on January 8, 1918, he tried to end one war and prevent the next. He failed at both. But he articulated a vision of international order based on cooperation rather than coercion, on rules rather than power. That vision was incomplete, compromised by racism and rigidity, unable to prevent the catastrophes ahead, but it survived. The question on January 8, 1918 asks, can idealism work in international relations? Wilson said yes if nations embrace collective security. His critics said idealism was dangerous naivete. Both were partly right. Idealism without power is useless. Power without ideals is tyranny. Wilson had ideals but couldn't build institutions to enforce them. The post-1945 order learned from his mistakes, combining Wilsonian ideals with power to back them up. That's why the UN survived when the League failed. We still need both. The vision to imagine better, the realism to build it. Tomorrow, we'll explore another moment that shaped our world. Thank you for your time. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. If you really enjoyed it, please tell a friend. I hope you will join me again tomorrow for more of our shared history.